What's going on, guys? Reisshub back with another video, and in today's video I want to quickly discuss everything we went over in Season 4, everything I learned, kind of some of the main meta takeaways, some of the main changes to the game, and how I think that's going to implement next season and how that's going to impact gameplay and performance. Let's get into it. Okay, so the first main big change that we saw that I was very happy to see is that the majority of the mythics were actually no longer in the tournament game modes. Obviously, the Doom's loot, being the Doom's gauntlets and Mystical Bomb, were still in the game to start with, and the Mystical Bomb ended up getting taken out during midway through the FNCS, which I was very happy to see. But overall, the majority of the mythics were not in the game. The fact that they took out Doom's Mystical Bomb halfway through the season and didn't end up putting it back in really is actually a really good sign, because it shows that I think they're understanding that mythics aren't good for the game. The only ones that was left were the actual gauntlets, and they weren't that good at all. They weren't really worth taking in solos in particular. In trios, they definitely were if you're going to play like Ultimate Height in endgame. So what I'm looking for next season is no mythics at all, and I think we may be going towards that because it really was split very heavily this season. Clearly they put the Doom's loot in to start with and then said, okay, we're going to cut this back for every other kind of mythical, and even start to cut out the Doom's loot like I already said. So fingers crossed that next season we see no mythics in the arena and also in competitive modes, because I don't really think they have a place there. The next part, Epic clearly really likes having AI in the Battle Royale. They've tried multiple different times with different forms of henchmen over the season, and most frustratingly obviously was the Marauders that were in. Don't think anyone in the competitive scene really liked them, happy to see them go, but at the Stark Jets, there's still a ton of AI there in the Stark Robots, and also in the Stark Industries itself, and in Doom's Domain there's the henchmen there as well. So it's clear that in these mythical spots, in the spots that are better loot, they seem to be consistently putting AI in. Personally, I hope they don't in the future, but if they are going to continue to put mythics in the game, even if it's just in pubs, I'm going to guess that in the competitive modes, even if those mythics aren't in, but the mythic spots are, there's still going to be henchmen there coming into future gameplay. So now that I've kind of touched on the topic, let's talk about mythic POIs. In this season, Season 4, obviously it was Stark Industries and Doom's Domain. These two, I don't like the way they play out in competitive at all. I think there should be no POIs in competitive that have this level of advantage to go to. In opens, it just makes every team drop there. It's just not worth doing. And what's funny is, these are the two best POIs, but if they were contested there, it was game over. And most of the time, players were contested there because of how sought after they were. I've talked about this in a ton of videos, so I'm not going to talk about it too much here, but all the teams ended up going to these spots that are really needing high elimination wins, and just the top teams in general, and it made some top teams play very poorly. One of my videos I covered Benchy, Savage and Lechy. They ended up going Dooms, griefing their whole basically FNCS because they wanted to kind of secure a mythic spot where if they could have gone to another POI and secured that uncontested, guaranteed they would have performed much better during all of the weeks. But the whole point is the fact that these two mythic POIs just don't promote good gameplay. It makes it way too dominant in terms of who is uncontested in other POIs, and if we see that again coming into Season 5, I have a feeling it just makes things a little bit more boring. Definitely the best way for competitive sake is just some POIs are better because of their positioning and just number of chests. And did I say chests? Well, here's something that obviously I don't like, and let's be real, a lot of other people don't as well, which is the lowered chest spawn rate. Now, I would probably be more okay with having mythic POIs in terms of Dooms and Stark Industries in the game if chest spawn rate was 100%. But the fact that there's 100% spawn rate in some of the vaults, the henchman chests, in these two mythic spots just makes them so good in comparison to the other POIs. Obviously, I was saying if they're uncontested, and this is one of the reasons why these two POIs become so contested, because there is such a good loot. You're guaranteed the vaults if you win it off spawn. There's guaranteed loot there. Other places don't have that guarantee. I think if there was a still 100% chest spawn rate, places like Sweaty Sands, which is obviously good, but it would give other teams more reason to contest this. In a competitive mode, why would you contest a POI that has not 100% chest spawns when you could contest another POI that has guaranteed loot? Just doesn't make any sense, and it makes for, in all honesty, not that interesting of a competitive narrative. And yes, just because a lot of the same team still performs. You know, a lot of these top teams still performed despite the fact that it was a lower chest spawn rate. 100%, you know, they still managed to work their way around it. It would have made things so much more viable. They could have 100% split other drops. It would have made the narratives more interesting. Some teams wouldn't have performed as poorly because they were just focusing on getting the loot from those two drops. Would have performed much better and been more interesting. Plus, let's be real, 100% chest spawns was the best thing. I'm just going to say straight up the best thing that was ever added to competitive. It reduces RNG so much in a game that has a ton of RNG already. And on top of that, it makes solo looting paths way more interesting. Right now, you just have to land at a POI. That's it. There are barely any spots that you can actually end up rotating through in solos right now because you're not guaranteed chests. Because of the lower chest spawn, it totally negates some of the other areas on the map. Rainbow Rentals. Why would anyone drop at Rainbow Rentals right now when there's 4 chests there that don't even have 100% chest spawn rate? It just does not make sense at all. And the thing is, sometimes there are players landing there who are contesting other players as well, which means that you're just fighting over nothing. You can fish, yes, but there's just nothing there. And it makes some of these smaller areas on the map so not viable and just not worth dropping at all. And we saw that coming out of all of the FNCS this season. There's only one team that won their entire region who didn't drop at a POI. Something consistent that we've seen throughout this season, again, was the console prize pool. This is now the third season in a row that we've had an FNCS that has been split to PC and console. Again, the prize pool has been exactly the same either way as well, so consistently the same as on PC as you are getting on console. I don't expect that to change at all. This season probably would have been the one, as in Season 4, to change if it was going to be anything, but having 3 of the exact same in a row just really seems like this is what they're going to consistently do coming forward, which is good news for console players. I did think that the new consoles coming out would be a real uptake, real step ahead, and that maybe there was going to be a change in this. You know, maybe it'll be split by input rather than by console to PC, but in all honesty, console's still capped at 60 FPS, horrible input lag. Yes, you get better, more consistent 60F in-game, but it's still nothing in comparison to a PC on 60 FPS, so I still think these are going to be split. Maybe, I don't know what's going to happen with mobile when Apple comes back. If it does, I don't know. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know what's going to go on with that one, for example. But at the same time, seems like for the foreseeable future, FNCSs and particularly platform cups are going to be consistently split this way. Maybe I'll eat my hat next season when the next FNCS is announced. Maybe that's not true, but just based on what we've been reading so far, I think this is what's going to happen. Another thing that we'll probably consistently see coming onto the next season is more fun and interesting, we'll say, tournaments. Clearly, they wanted to implement Wild Wednesdays to kind of get a little bit more casual base involved with the competitive scene, which personally I have no problem with at all. And in particular, we saw things like the Marvel tournament, obviously sponsored by Marvel with a pretty big prize pool, which helped a ton of more players again get interested in the competitive scene. And the Marvel Cup had quite a big prize pool split, going all the way down to top 500 teams in EU made money for this. So definitely the way you want to do it if you're going to advertise a more casual tournament, because it's definitely going to pique more interest from those more casual and intermediate level players to come back into competitive if they've never played or have played previously, and really perform and grow that number a lot. And growing the competitive scene is always a good thing. Now, the main caveat to this, obviously, as long as they don't impact the main tournaments, they don't take away prize pool from this. The Marvel Cup, that was sponsored by Marvel, they're not going to sponsor an FNCS. But as long as Wild Wednesdays, etc., don't take away from that main prize pool for FNCS and the real competitive scene, we'll say, can't wait. Keep them coming, grow that competitive scene.
Hey, it's Edit and Reese here. You can tell I'm editing because I have glasses on. Wow. One of the things I also want to add in that I completely forgot about when I was talking about earlier is the fact that I really hope Opens tournaments are somewhat a little bit different. This season we've seen too many teams starting late and just completely dominate their own tournaments by starting like 2 hours in, going for just like 30 bombs. Super Cup, great example. You can see here Savage finding a guy who quite literally has almost never played the game before. He doesn't even have auto sprint on. He's found this big tennis ball he's loving life and he gets landed on. And they drop a 30 bomb this game. Like, this shouldn't be possible, and obviously I'm no hate towards either of these people, be it Savage or the person loving the tennis ball, but fundamentally, like, this just should not be possible in an Opens tournament to come across this level of player this deep into the game and still qualify. If you're this far behind, there just should be no way. Opens tournaments, I really hope, would be way more placement heavy next season. We've seen the Nikkei 30 Cup, which was way too placement heavy, definitely, but like, that was an Opens tournament with a very small prize pool that still had really good quality of games once you kind of got out of that lower Opens lobby area. So like, fingers crossed that for next time. Right, back to not editing Reese. So a few of the changes in-game really revolved around mobility, and I think mobility is probably one of the biggest discussions that we should be having about the meta, because it changes pretty much every season, and for the better, sometimes for the worst. So first thing that I really liked about the mobility is the actual rifts on the map. Rifts on map are very good mobility. I always wondered how they would impact the gameplay from a more competitive style now, but fundamentally it seems to be pretty positive.
Rifts aren't OP rotations in a stacked game by any means, because if you rift anywhere after the first zone, you're just getting beamed because there are players already set up to get their Storm Surge tags on hills. They hear that rift and the whole lobby focuses you. Even when you land, you're going to get server sprayed. So unless you rift really, really early, you're just going to get beamed out of the sky. So I actually really like rifts for competitive, and obviously it gives you that risk factor. If you're in a more dead game, you can obviously use them to rotate in. Great. If you're in a more stacked game, a little bit more risky of a play, but fundamentally I think they're actually really good to keep these on the map. I don't know if they're going to stay, because I don't know if Stark will get removed. I'm imagining that Stark Island's going to be removed next season, but fundamentally I don't know if they're going to be still here, but I kind of hope we do have rifts around the map, in particular around that kind of edge, just like we used to have back in Chapter 1. Rifts, very, very nice. Another thing that was introduced on map mobility was cars. And they were introduced originally in Season 3, but that was not in competitive, they were just in pubs. In Season 4, they were released into the arena game mode and into competitions, and originally I thought these would be really kind of stupid. I thought they would be really broken. I thought they were kind of gimmicky, like the helicopter was. You know, I thought it would just be similar things to that. But fundamentally, it was just the same thing as kind of a golf cart. You got really punished for going in them in late game, but they gave you those really good early game rotations. I said late game as if people were using them too much in end game. We saw what happened. But fundamentally, in that early and mid game, you really, really benefited by using them, but at the same time, it was risky because you could easily get beamed out of them. So really actually like the way cars played into the game, and I'm guessing these will probably stay as well, and I hope they do. They're really nice, clean mobility. So some of the mobility you can use in your inventory was obviously shockwaves and crash pads. Firstly, you can also have bounce pads, and I gotta say, I love bounce pads. Bounce pads should be in the game every season. I say these kind of things at the end of every season and they always remove them, which is annoying. But I love me some bounce pads. I really hope these stay. But let's look at crash pads and shockwaves. And I don't think they were that bad in this meta for trios, because fundamentally they're not as impactful. They're difficult to rotate your entire trio from, and it's much more difficult to actually kind of fight with them, use them in fights as a trio, because if you psycho into someone's box with a crash pad as a solo, chances are you're going to be outnumbered 1v3. So not a great idea, but if you've played a lot of arena solos this season, you'll realize that shockwaves in particular are so irritating. They are so irritating, and people just shockwave. They have 6 shockwaves in inventory. You start fighting them, they just keep flying away from you, There's not much you can do. Shockwaves are something that this season I did not like. I've not liked them in any season that they were in so far, so I hope they're gone next season. But they seem to keep wanting to put them in, so if they're going to keep them in the game, I really hope they nerf them in some way, because although they didn't nerf the drop stack size of them from 3 to 2, it's still very frustrating. It's not an item that I want in the game. If it's going to be like a solo or duo meta, if it's squads or trios or like a big team mode, I don't think they're that bad. But if it's like a solos or duos season, I don't think shockwaves fit at all. Same thing with crash pads. I think they worked actually reasonably well for trios. They weren't broken. They were difficult rotates because, again, hard to rotate a whole trio on the crash pads. They're not free. I think crash pads actually ended up being okay, despite them being so annoying after the solo season. Solo season, everyone just hated them because they just crash pad it into your box. But again, I think that was more just because it was a solos season, full stop. So again, if it's a duos, trios, or squads meta, I don't think crash pads are going to be as bad, but I'm definitely okay with them being taken out. Something that was removed this season was the launch pad. It was in for Season 2 and also Season 3. It wasn't for Season 1. It had been removed for Season 4, and I'm very okay with that, in all honesty. You know, launch pads are better for bigger team modes. When there's 3 of you in a team, it's really easy rotates if you all use the same launch pad over and over again. But fundamentally, I think the removal of them was actually good. Launch pads do just create a very, very free rotation in that first moving, you know. Most of the time, you'll see every single team use a launch pad in their first moving, get as far ahead of zone as possible, then use all their mats to rotate, they stay alive for ages. And I think I actually kind of like the difficulty in a trio game mode that was going on, having to use your shockwaves, having to use other rotations, having to actually think about your rotate rather than just having a free rotate with a launch pad. So I'm actually okay with launch pads not being in the game. In my own opinion, I don't think inventory rifts or inventory launch pads really have a place within competitive. Just an opinion. I know a lot of people would disagree with that, but for solos, there's usually better mobility in terms of like shockwaves. I know I just said I didn't like them, but they're in the game anyway. Shockwaves and crash pads, bounce pads, all of these. And in squads, say I'm just kind of going on either end of the spectrum, you have so many materials that it's definitely not as bad if you choose a good rotate. That first moving and the kind of half in, half out zone is really tough without kind of any mobility at all. Fundamentally, I don't think they have a place. Hope you guys enjoyed and learned a lot. I've been Reisshub. Please like the video if you haven't already, and please subscribe if you aren't already. Channel's growing, been putting out good content. Help support your boy. Please use code Reisshub in the item shop as well. Again, support your boy. New season's coming out soon, so you know, hook a brother up. Catch you later. Peace.